Hey everyone, Milton here, and I wanted to talk today about Plague Marines. So this is part of a series of shorter videos on specific matchups for Blades of Khaine, focusing on the most important ploys and abilities, and giving some suggestions on how I approach those matchups. Now, while I have a lot of experience with this team, my way is not the only way, and if you have additional advice on these matchups, please put it in the comments. I want this playlist to be as complete a resource as possible for folks learning to play Blades of Khaine. So, why Plague Marines? Well, there's a couple reasons. I've had a lot of people ask me for advice on the elite matchups because folks are struggling with them, and because elites are pretty powerful and quite popular. Also, I painted up my Plague Marines a little while ago, and I really like how they look. So it's a team that I've played a bit. I don't love playing them, but, I've taken them and won a local tournament. So, because this is a team that is in the current starter set for KIllTeam, it is a team that you will run into and that you have to have a game plan for. Because if you play into Plague Marines like you would play into a lot of the more mid-range or Horde matchups, you'll bounce off of them and die. So, let's talk first about faction rules. They have three. The first is the Astartes rule. These are Space Marines, so they come with all of the standard Space Marine stat lines. They are APL 3, 14 wounds, 3-up save. The big thing here, though, is that they are only move 5 instead of 6, so they are a bit slower. The Astartes rule lets them do 2 shoot or fight actions with some restrictions, and they can counteract regardless of their order. So, very important to keep in mind. Their second faction rule is Poison. They have a bunch of abilities, ploys, and equipment that allows them to poison models. And when you're poisoned, when you activate that operative that is poisoned, you take an additional point of damage. It's not a ton of damage, but they have access to severe on their bolt weapons. And so if you're shot at with a bolt weapon and you take a crit and a normal, that's 7 damage, 1 from poison, that'll kill you. So it makes their bolt weapons kind of like sneakily good at killing Blades of Khaine operatives with 1 shoot action. And then their third rule is disgustingly resilient. When they take damage of 3 or more, they can roll a d6, and then on a 4-up, they subtract 1 from the inflicted damage, so it does make them quite tanky. Since you're going to need multiple shots to drop them, each one of those shots they can potentially reduce the damage on. So that's very important to keep in mind. There's 3 of their operatives that I wanted to talk about in particular. The first being the Malignant Plaguecaster. First, because it is the most important. It has quite good psychic ranged attacks, but the thing it does that we really need to keep in mind is that it can heal their models. So, not all the Space Marine teams have a way to heal. This one does, and they can heal, it's a 3-inch range, and it can heal up to 7 wounds. Now they can only do it once per turning point, but if you have to commit a bunch of resources and potentially multiple models and expose our own models to try and kill a Plague Marine, they make their disgustingly resilient rolls, we take it to 1 or 2 wounds, and they heal it back up to 8 or 9. That can be backbreaking and can lose you the game. So we'll talk a little bit about how to play around that later, but it's very important to keep in mind that if you are attacking something near a Malignant Plaguecaster and you don't finish it off, it can regain a whole bunch of wounds. The second model I want to discuss is the Icon Bearer. This is, it just has a bolt gun and a long knife, so not all that threatening, but it allows them to use one of their strategic ploys, Contagion, for free every turn as long as the model is on our half of the board. And they're going to want to use that strategic ploy every single turn, so you can count on this model coming up the board towards you pretty aggressively. The third is their leader. So the Plague Marine Champion has a pretty good melee weapon, has a plasma pistol, and it has the Grandfather's Blessing, which is a rule that allows it to heal a couple of wounds when a poisoned model near it takes damage. So this is important to keep in mind because, similar to the Plaguecaster, anything that hands out healing on top of the extreme durability on this team and the lot of wounds and the high saves makes them exponentially harder to kill. So similar to the Plaguecaster, you really don't want to go into the champion and not kill it and have a bunch of poisoned models around and let it start healing back up on its own. So, I've talked about the Icon Bearer and mentioned the Contagion ploy. Let's talk a little bit about their strategic ploys and then their firefight ploys next. So, Contagion, I'll put the text up on the screen. It does two things. It reduces our move stat and worsens the hit stat of our weapons by 1 as long as we are near them. And this is really quite good because we have pretty strong melee, but we only have 4 attack dice on it. So if you're going with a Howling Banshee into even just a Plague Marine Heavy Gunner, if you make that charge but they have Contagion up, odds are you're only hitting on 2 of those attacks. So you are not going to finish them off. You will end up losing combats, even to their gunners, and it's very embarrassing and bad, and then they will activate and then just punch you to death. So, don't let them do it. Don't charge into full health Plague Marines. It's not worth it. If it's the only possible way that you can win the game, sure, go for it. Play to your outs. But in most cases, there is something better you can be doing with your models than just charging at Plague Marines. The second strategic ploy is Lumbering Death. When they are shooting or fighting during an activation in which they have not moved more than 3 inches, or if they're retaliating, all of their weapons get ceaseless. This is very good. So if we're charging into them, we're hitting on 4s. Even if we're charging with a Banshee, let's say they're also hitting on 4s, sure, but they also get ceaseless. So, again, don't charge full health Plague Marines. You generally only want to charge them if you just need 1 hit in order to finish them off. And then the third strategic ploy that's worth mentioning here is Cloud of Flies. Now this is important because you want to be shooting at them a lot, as much as possible, and you'll probably want to take some Dire Avengers. But if your game plan comes down to a bunch of Dire Avengers sort of, from one end of the board with limited lines of sight, they can use Cloud of Flies to plant a big smoke marker and shut down that shooting. So keep in mind that they have this. They generally want to be spending their their command points on other things. But if you put yourself in a position where this can blow you out, well, yeah, that's no good. Don't do it. Alright, so on to firefight ploys. There's really only one that I think is super important here for this particular matchup, and that is Sickening Resilience. And this allows them to automatically pass their disgustingly resilient rolls for an attack sequence. So it's hard to play around because they get to choose when to use it. Generally speaking, I count on a Plague Marine player making all of their disgustingly resilient rolls. I treat all of my weapons that are damage 3 or more as if they are 1 damage fewer, and so I am never surprised and I'm never disappointed when they pass those rolls or when they use this, because that's what I'm counting on. And I would encourage you all to think the same way in this matchup. Sure, it's a dice game, but I generally try to count on my dice being bad, or the dice being against me. That way I can better play around my opponent's capabilities. So that covers the ploys. Let's talk a couple pieces of equipment real quick. The first is Plague Bells. It allows them to ignore the changes to the stats of their operatives from being injured. This is quite good, but you'll notice it's just injury. It does not allow them to ignore the effects of being stunned. Several of the other elite teams do have something that allows them to ignore stun. So, you can't injure them, but you can stun them. Another piece of faction equipment which is quite important here are Plague Rounds. For their bolt guns and bolt pistols, they get poison and severe, so they will always get a crit. So earlier when I was talking about taking like a crit and a normal from a bolt weapon being 7 wounds and then dying to poison, Plague Rounds makes that a pretty common occurrence. So you really, really don't want to let them shoot. If you look at the Icon Bearer and it's like, okay, well, it's just a bolt pistol. How bad could it be? Well, if you don't roll great on your saves, it can potentially get double kills just shooting the bolt pistol. So don't let them do it. And sort of the next piece here is TAC Ops selection. Plague Marines have access to security or seek and destroy. So now that we've talked about this, let's try and put it all together and come up with a game plan to combat them. First, between security and seek and destroy, Plague Marines will almost always take security, at least in the current approved ops deck, and either contain or take ground, depending on the map and on the player. So that's important to keep in mind. And, I think that Blades of Khaine actually is pretty good at denying their points on both of those. If they're taking contain, we have fast operatives, and we can usually find a side of the board to just slingshot a model down where they won't be able to get to it. If they're playing take ground, we potentially have more APL3 models than they do, and we can use them to contest points if we need to. So, very important to keep in mind. When we're looking at our own TAC Ops, I know there's a lot of people that favor taking plant beacons. I used to be one of them, but as I've said a number of times, I'm actually quite bad at plant beacons. I find that if I'm doing all of the things I really want to be doing, and using mobility to get free shots off and to try and win on material, that I'm kind of blocking myself out from planting all the beacons, and I rarely would end up maxing it. Because of that, into elites especially, I prefer to play a really aggressive game where I'm aiming to take as many Space Marines off the table as possible, and so I will tend to take either confirm kill or to play security TAC Ops into them. And because they're slow, and because we out-activate them and can deal a lot of damage, I find that it is easier for us to deny their security points than it is for them to deny ours. So, against Plague Marines, I will often take either, I may take the Striking Scorpion Exarch with a Claw, just because he's quite good at putting out a lot of damage in melee. But more frequently, I'll end up playing a Dire Avenger Exarch, taking 2 Dire Avenger Warriors, so that I have access to security. And so, that kind of gives me a really streamlined game plan where I don't need to spend extra APL trying to do TAC Op. I can spend all my APL on the crit op and killing Marines. So the next point here is it's really important to play safe. They're a slow team, and because are 2 whole inches faster than them on movement, and we have access to acrobatic on our Howling Banshees, and we have other mobility tools, we can afford to position to control space. So we can position our models where they can't get to us, but where if they walk onto points, we can easily get to them. And that's what I like to do here. You don't want to be in a position where they're able to start moving and double shooting and potentially picking up multiple of our operatives in a single activation. That's terrible for us. But what we can do is use our higher movement and our APL3 to move, shoot, and then dash out of line of sight somewhere they can't get to us, because the game plan is to try and chip damage as much as possible, take as many ceaseless shuriken shots as you possibly can, and eventually you'll spike some and they'll start dropping. That's it. I've said this in a bunch of videos about a bunch of different matchups. The more you shoot your shurikens with ceaseless, the more crits you will roll, and the more enemy operatives will die, regardless of how many wounds they have, what their saves are, or how much they can heal. It's especially important here because they're so good at killing us, and they're especially durable, that we take those free shots wherever we can find them, just to give you more and more opportunities to hit those spikes, right? So you really don't want to be in a position where, okay, my only way to attack these operatives is an acrobatic charge with Howling Banshee. Because as I've said earlier, they have great defenses, they're quite good in melee, they're much more reliable than us in melee because of Contagion and Lumbering Death, and so you'll just end up charging in with a Banshee and dying. And you may get a crit, and Rain of Tears, and then be able to shoot, but you also might not get that crit. It happens. So I really try to prioritize safety for my own models, and only going into melee when I need that one hit to finish them off. Another big point here is that because they're so slow, we have a lot of flexibility in how we deploy, and how we position in turning points 1 and 2. What I mean by that is that they only have 6 models, and they're all slow, so they sort of have to commit those models to a certain lane of the board, or to get into a stronghold. And anytime they have to climb over a wall, it costs them so much of their movement that they really have to kind of pick a lane and stay in it. We don't have to. So we can make it look like we're going one direction on the board and then shift a bunch of our operatives the other direction, and it's harder for them to respond to that than a faster team would. Also, because we out-activate them, we can kind of make those shifts at the end of a turning point, and they really don't have any option to respond to that as we're doing it. This is really good because combined with our high movement and deployable equipment, we can make it very difficult for them to use certain lanes of the board. So like I said, if they have to climb anything, that's a huge problem for Plague Marines, right? But if we deploy with the intention of shifting what lane of the board we're going into with our models, and then we use scouting to place a razor wire to shut off their movement through one of those lanes of the board, or on Volcus to put it near a wall so they just can't actually cross over at all because they would have to climb that and the wall, and there's like not enough room to place their base in the middle. It can be huge and force them to spend a whole extra activation just moving around and doing nothing. On ITD, you can do similar things where there's choke points that you can place razor wire. So seriously consider razor wire for your equipment, especially in scouting, and consider where you can shift. So generally, you want to shift where their plague caster isn't, right? Like, he can heal things near him, but he can't heal anything that's 4 inches away. So if they have to start exposing models on the other side of the board, that's where we want to attack, because those are going to be the easiest models to pick up. And once you start killing some models, they're going to have to start spreading out more and more just in order to have coverage for take ground or, excuse me, for the crit op. So as you kill more things, it becomes easier to kill more because they have to expose themselves, right? So really, I think this game, a lot of it comes down to your initial game plan. What tac ops you take, what board you're on, where you can deny them with equipment, and then funnel them into positions where you can get free shots on them until they're easy to finish off. So I know this has been a little bit longer of a video than I wanted to do here. I don't know, I've got a lot to say about Blades of Khaine. I love playing the team. And I hope that it's been useful. A lot of what I've talked about here with positioning is, especially important against Plague Marines, but applies to any elite matchup. You want to shoot as many times as you can with your shuriken, and eventually they will die. So thank you all for watching the video. I hope you found it useful. Please like and subscribe to the videos. We're not sponsored. This isn't monetized. So I want to get this out there and help other people learn to play the team. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.